Self-confidence comes from having your own back. Sometimes when we consider the possibility of failure or humiliation or loss or anything like that, any sort of setback, we think of it as though it's a destination.
Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura Eigel. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. Hi there, friends. I am thrilled to announce that I've written my first book, and it is called Values First: How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want. I have poured my heart into this book with personal stories and stories from coaching clients using the Values First framework. Between the constant pressure of job performance and demands on your time, it's easy to lose sight of your values, letting them shift out of alignment. Those simple misalignments are keeping you from feeling joyful and fulfilled. Learn how to recenter your life and career around what truly matters to you. Order Values First now at your favorite independent bookstore or at Barnes & Noble or Amazon. I want to make sure that you are the first to know about every book activity that we have in store, including virtual and in-person events. Stay up to date by joining our list at thecatchgroup.com/valuesfirst. That's thecatchgroup.com/valuesfirst. Welcome to this week's episode of You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. I'm really excited for you to hear our conversation with guest Bribiesca-Hedin. She's a former management consultant and strategy expert turned women's leadership and executive coach. As the CEO of Bridgewell Professional Services, she teaches accomplished professional women to become influential, sought-after leaders without overworking, people-pleasing, or selling their souls. I love whenever I can connect with another coach. I learn so much from them. And we had such a great discussion. And we talked about really how to handle criticism from anyone. And by anyone, I mean anyone, including and especially internal criticism. How we criticize ourselves, which happens a lot. And we also talked about handling external criticism from key stakeholders. I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. Let's get started. Well, I want to welcome you to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure. I am so excited to be here and just to be able to connect with you and be in this conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure just getting to know you just a little bit before we started the podcast. And I think we're both just really excited about this topic and where our conversation will go. And just to kick us off, I'd love if you could tell our listeners, if you could tell us a little bit more about your story.
Absolutely. So my background is in management consulting, and that's kind of what I wanted to do right out of business school. I actually went to business school because I heard that was the easiest way to get into management consulting, right? So I was very deliberate about doing all that. And, I took the right classes and got involved with the right things and went into management consulting. And I loved that everything was kind of like a puzzle, right? Like trying to figure out how to make it all work and how to make it all come together. So I was in consulting for several years, left that once I had kids and didn't want to be traveling anymore, but always came back to roles that had to do with that were in some sort of advisory capacity and just kind of figuring things out, right? So increasing capabilities for the organization or the team or whatever the case is. And, most recently, like maybe the last 8 years before I opened my company a couple of years ago, I worked in enterprise transformation. And in that space, it really paid off to stay curious, because what I found is that over the years, now this was either whether it was in management consulting, and it didn't matter whether the industry was healthcare, entertainment, or anything else, I noticed that there were folks that always seemed to do better, like their teams always outperformed. And it wasn't necessarily because they had the best team. Like, it wasn't necessarily because they even had the best or spot on strategy or tech, or it was nothing like that. But what I boiled it down to and kind of ran with, right? So that's kind of what I hold on to, is that they seem to be the teams that really believed they could figure it out, even if they didn't know what was coming next. So they had this self-confidence, like real self-confidence that was not circumstantial. It was not dependent on them knowing what was coming next, having done it before, or having even any level of familiarity. Like, what it came down to was like, yeah, we don't know. Things might go sideways, but we'll figure it out. And that was, I don't know, that was just, to me, kind of like a kind of brain bursting moment there, because we spend so much time and so much investment and so much effort trying to get it right, in terms of buying the right software solution or hiring the right consulting team or doing, whatever it is, right? Getting the to-dos right. That really what was more important than those to-dos, which I refer to as the tangibles, right? You can get all the tangibles right, but what needs to come before the tangibles are those intangibles. So that's what got me into this space, to really talk about those intangibles, what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on inside, what's going on in our heads that actually makes the difference. So it was a super long way of responding to. I kind of fell in love with that leadership and personal development and growth side. Mm-hmm. So, all the work that I did ended up having that component being my favorite aspect to it. Even if I was there to talk about the tech, right? Mm-hmm. It kind of went to that piece. And then I eventually decided that I wanted to do that more deliberately, help create leaders and help really advance capacity, in particular for women, an opportunity for women. And that brought me into executive coaching and leadership development. And so I opened my company next month. It'll be 2 years, actually, 2 years ago. Yeah, right as the pandemic was taking off. So it's been an interesting learning experience. Yeah. And so that's what we've been doing since. And I absolutely love it. I have some of the most amazing clients on earth, probably like a lot of the folks listening to your podcast. So yeah, and that's my very long-winded story and how I got here, and I'm now in this conversation with you. And I love talking about confidence and empowerment. And then, of course, we do a lot of actual training on the leadership side and those tangibles we talked about. But I really like to, get to the, okay, you probably have all the credentials you already need. You're probably brilliant and overeducated by most standards in the world. So what do we need to tweak to make it all come together and actually pay off?
Wow, I really resonate with what you just mentioned. It's so interesting because I love talking to other coaches and leadership development geeks. I call myself a geek. I hope that's okay. But I lumped you in there with me. But I feel like the same passions that you have, I totally resonate with those. And so often I find that some of my clients are like, okay, I need to go to this certification, or I have to take another this or another that, when really they have all the things that they already need. Maybe it's a tweak or a refinement or just a change in mindset, right? And so this idea of confidence, I want to pick your brain because I think it's, especially for women, it's been, imposter syndrome, all the things. It's a theme and it's not going away anytime soon, right? So unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. It is. And honestly, I think it's our own creation, right?
Say more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I from where I'm sitting, it's our own creation. And we aggravate it and actually amplify it by the things we do it seems counterintuitive. Like there's no way that can make it worse. And I'll give you an example. So, when you think about, I want to feel more confident, you don't go to figuring out what's in your head necessarily, right? We go out there to try to figure out what to do. And so we'll do things like, okay, well, I'm going to do, the superwoman stance before all of my presentations, and strike a power pose for a few minutes. I'm going to repeat affirmations to myself to remind me, how awesome I am. I'm going to make sure I have all the credentials in check and that I'm dressed the part. But what often happens after we've done all those things is that we come out the other end still feeling filled with doubt. And so then we think, well, I must be even more messed up or more of an imposter than I thought I was because I did all the things and yet I'm not seeing the result.
Yeah.
Right. But the reason we don't see the result is because you can't take external action to address an internal struggle. It does not work that way. That's like dropping your keys in the garage, but going to look for them in the driveway because the lighting is better. It's like, no, it's more convenient, but you're not going to find what you're looking for there. Right. So, that I think just exacerbates that feeling, that sensation of being an imposter and like wondering why the doubt is not going away. I'm a big believer actually that the doubt is supposed to be there. If you're breathing and living human being and you're up to big things, the doubt is supposed to be there. That is not going to go away. The problem with the doubt is when you let the doubt be the driver to your decisions, right? So a lot of my practice and my coaching is on being deliberate about how we make decisions. And when we realize, right, that we're making decisions based on doubt, that at least gives us an opportunity to be like, okay, well, what would I rather have driving my decisions, right? And that's when we get to be, super creative and intentional and purpose-driven and decide that what we actually want to have drive our decisions is, that ultimate goal or that next accomplishment or our whatever that North Star is for you. But making that decision, like there's almost no wrong decision as long as you're doing it on purpose.
I love that. So good. Oh my goodness. That idea of doing all the external things and expecting the internal to change. I think that's exactly what people are doing.
Yeah.
Looking for their keys in the wrong place.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I have a friend who would call it, how did she say? She'd say, yeah, they're going to the hardware store looking for milk. They'd be pissed off because they left empty-handed. Exactly.
Yeah. And so then we find ourselves in these loops, like you said, or even worse off, right?
Or even worse off. Yeah. And again, I don't know if you've seen this, and probably some of the folks listening, this might resonate, but we often go after an accomplishment because we're thinking that it's going to fill some gap, right? And so then once we've met the accomplishment, we realize the gap is still not filled. And again, just like I just talked about, that's because you can't take external action to address an internal challenge. But we don't recognize that it's not working. So we keep on thinking we haven't found, we just need more credential, and then we need more training, and, that'll give us more credibility. And then I get to believe that I am a confident, capable professional, right? But the challenge is, again, that gap never gets filled, and you already were that confident, capable professional. You just weren't seeing it, like we were looking in the wrong place for it. So yeah, it really does exacerbate it because we get into these loops. We get into these loops of credential seeking, accomplishment seeking, validation seeking, and people pleasing, all to try to at least temporarily address that internal gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think everything that you just said for high achieving women times 10, it's especially.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. It's a real struggle. And the funny thing is that with the other thing I'm finding and that I keep researching is that when you do actually get the recognition or the validation, something happens inside and it almost just further aggravates that sense of imposter syndrome or of pretending, because calling attention, even though it's counterintuitive, again, calling attention to that accomplishment actually has a way to immediately take us to the yeah, but if you only knew about this, that, and the other about me, right? So we immediately go to the right, like, yeah, I did do that, but like it didn't fix all this. Right? And we might not say it out loud, but our handy dandy automatic brain is ready to take control and remind us everything else that's still missing or that's not perfect or whatever the case is, right? Every other should.
So how are those teams that you mentioned at the beginning? You said, these some teams, like how did they do it? The ones that are, I don't want to use the word resilient, but maybe they know that they can figure it out, right? They know they
Yeah.
can figure it out. What are they relying on in the face of that internal criticism and doubt? Or so I guess two questions, internally and then maybe externally too, because even if people are telling us you're great, there are always those people who are handing us opportunities for feedback, right? And it's that, yeah, opportunities for feedback in quotes.
Yeah.
It's criticism, right? Or you could have
Yes.
done it this way. So I guess it's twofold. What are they doing for that internal, churn that we feel?
Yeah.
And then how do you deal with it externally too?
I'll tell you my take and the way that, I work with teams and clients internally. And my recommendation always is that you be okay with the self-doubt, right? So self-doubt is not your enemy. So that's fine. So we set that one aside. But the other side is that, like, I teach that self-confidence comes from having your own back. Sometimes when we consider the possibility of failure or humiliation or loss or anything like that, any sort of setback, we think of it as though it's a destination. We think that that experience, that disappointment, that failure, again, that humiliation, whatever that is where we're going to stay. Mm-hmm. And so if you believe that that's where your story ends, then of course you're unwilling to take risks and be open-minded and, go for the thing or whatever it is. Of course, right? It makes perfect sense because you don't want your story to end there. So, my take on that is that we recognize that it's not the title of the book. It might just be a little section in a chapter. That's all that was. Like, that was just a moment. So it's just up to us to not make that setback a death sentence for our self-esteem, because that's where we go with it.
I love the having your back. If you're having your own back, it's not the whole book. It's like a sentence or a footnote or a something.
Yes, that's it. It's just part of the story, but it's not your whole story.
Yeah.
But I think where we decide that we'd rather not even try is when we're too afraid of being with the disappointment. But what I try to help people, recognize is that you've actually then decided to be disappointed in advance because you didn't even decide to go for it, right? You decided to fail in advance, because you didn't even, take that step forward or lean into it. So, you're doing it anyway, except that when you decide to fail or be disappointed in advance, you don't even get that benefit that you do on the other side, like when you stumble, of like kind of getting the extra experience, of finding new and creative ways, to deal with the setback. There was no learning to be had. And then needless to say, the possibility of success, right? Because what if it did work? What if it did go the way that you wanted it to go? But every time we decide to fail in advance, we have very efficiently wiped all of that out.
I love this idea of not being disappointed in advance. Like, how much time are we wasting? Oh my goodness.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, you're so right though. I mean, don't we spend a tremendous amount of time?
Yes.
Failing or fearing in advance when the only thing on the other side of that is, a feeling that doesn't feel good, a discomfort.
Yeah. And I feel like we're physically wasting time doing that, but we're also like, how much energy are we wasting? Like, it's a drain.
Yeah. Oh my God, it totally is. I mean, and when you think about, the level of stress in our careers, especially as high achieving, accomplished women, the demands outside of our careers, the mental energy that is being absorbed by either pretending, worrying that we're not good enough, or avoiding what we really want for fear of failure is like astounding to me, right? I just imagining if that wasn't there, what else would you be taking on and doing with your life and your relationships and the people and things you love? It's like, it just blows my mind when I think about that.
There's so much on the table that we're giving away. And like you said, we're doing it to ourselves. We're doing it to ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. But we don't know. And that's
Right.
the thing. That's why I think, the conversations we engage in with our clients, that you, same as with me, a lot of it is just bringing awareness to, okay, did you know you were thinking that? And now that you know you're thinking that, right? Is that the thought choice you want to make? Like, is it serving you to decide, I can't fathom or handle the possibility of failure, so I'm not even going to try? Like, is that really where you want to go, to where you think you're going to be so disappointed that it's going to destroy the very essence of you, which of course, isn't the case for these accomplished, high achieving women. That's not reality, but we don't even challenge it. Like, we just think it's so. We think, what are they going to think? I'm going to be humiliated. My life is over. It's like that inner teen drama that never goes away.
The angst, the internal angst.
It's like, yeah.
What about, so we talked a lot about internal. What about external? What happens when we get that external criticism? Could have done it this way, or, hey, I have the feedback for you. Do you have a minute?
Yeah.
How did those teams that do it well handle that criticism and keep that confidence that you mentioned before?
I think that's such a good question. What immediately came to mind is a lot of those teams tend to almost be their biggest critics. Like, they're almost like measuring and figuring out. But I do have an idea about that. I suspect that a lot of that comes from approaching the challenge or the setback almost through a scientist lens, right? It's not a failure, it's just more learning.
Yeah.
So when we're willing to take on that level of curiosity and, well, let's see what happened, or let's see what we can do, and let's see what went well and what didn't go well, I think it just puts us in a different space because we're looking for the opportunity, right? And because it doesn't mean anything about us. We're scientists. If my experiment works or not, it's not a judgment on me. It just gave me more information. And I suspect, and I take it that that's what the teams are doing, right? Actually looking at it with that level of curiosity. There's not judgment there. It's literally just curiosity. Like, okay, what's here for us to get? What's here for us to see? And that kind of carries over into the, when we're talking about just individuals, right? From person to person, when you have that very helpful relative that wants to.
That auntie that needs to tell you how she feels. Yeah.
Yes. Every time. Yeah. I think that the angst around criticism just comes from what we make it mean. We assume that the criticism is about us. There might be, there's a little bit about it there might be something in there about us, and we definitely want to listen for that. But more likely than not, the criticism is about the criticizer more than it is about the criticized. But we don't necessarily always see it that way or even believe that that's the case. But it's so interesting because, in the space of, psychology and psychiatry, they can actually create, because I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I know that psychiatrists can create a reasonably competent diagnosis simply by listening to how some criticizes. So I think, I don't know, to me, that is incredibly telling, that the criticism is less about us than we've been led to believe it is. Although it feels awful. Right?
It could feel awful, to your point,
Yeah.
if that's how you're perceiving it, as opposed to, hey, it's data, or, hey, we're curious.
Yeah.
I love that kind of mindset shift there. And I also love just the question, what is their feedback saying about them? It might be that they're a data person and they're asking for a different level of data, or it might mean that,
it might be just a way to interpret them even more, or interpret their needs or wants maybe too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Looking at it through their lens, or right, or their filter, however you want to think about that. Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think that's spot on. And also, again, we can be the most, enlightened and open individuals, but criticism doesn't feel good to human beings, right? And there are a couple of primary reasons that boils down to, and that's that we don't like to be controlled and we don't like to be put down, right? So criticism has an incredibly efficient way of doing both of those all at once.
At the same time. Thanks,
At the same
criticism.
Yeah, at the same time. The other thing is that with criticism, usually the only reason, well, that's not the only reason, a primary reason that people criticize who actually are looking out for your best interest, right? They do want to catch you winning, is because they want to see a change in behavior, right? Think about it when we criticize. When we criticize someone, and again, that doesn't go away. So we just have to catch ourselves. So when we criticize, we're not going to criticize if we see the behaviors that we already wanted to see. We criticize because we're hoping that it's going to trigger a different way of being for the other person. The problem is it doesn't work. We don't respond to criticism by being really deliberate and strategic and shifting our behavior in that way. But criticism isn't really going anywhere, right? But when we recognize that we're criticizing because we want to shift in behavior, then that can at least make us curious. Like, okay, what shift in behavior are they looking for? Sometimes you're going to find they're not looking for a shift in behavior. Sometimes you're going to find that it's unfortunately intended to be a put down or to keep you, quote unquote, humble or whatever the case is, right? And at that point, we get to choose how, what we want to do with that. There are some things that I recommend to people when they're receiving criticism and just kind of want to be deliberate about how they respond to it, right? When there's that interaction going on, just doing that quick check about what do I want the outcome to be is really important to me. And in the moment, it's really hard even to ask ourselves that question, but just for a quick second, I'm like, okay, is there any way or chance that this can turn out the way I want it to turn out? Or does this person just want to share their perspective or, put down or critique or recommendation or whatever the case is, right? So just understanding what it is that we want that outcome to be. Unfortunately, when we're receiving criticism, we often want the person to change their mind. We want them to see that we either take it personally and decide, oh, they're attacking me, right? Not the how I did it or not the deliverable or the result, but they're attacking me. So we take it as that. So yeah, I think it's so important to distinguish what that intent is over there and then what you want to do about it, how you want to approach it. Because sometimes it's just not worth having the fight when it's not going to shift the needle.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you have an example of that? Is there?
Yeah, I think, for example, if one of the recommendations that I offer, and this is really common, is if you're getting criticism that feels unwarranted, I actually recommend asking the person for specifics. Yeah. Give me specific details and let me know what you would have liked to see. And the reason I go there is because if I've received criticism and I say, yeah, sure, what could that have looked like? Or what should that have looked like? It does a couple things. It not only puts both of you in solution finding mode, but if they were just trying to jab, it disarms the situation because they don't know how to respond.
Yeah,
right?
They don't have an example, right?
No.
It's just a feeling or a something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was all it is. And at that point, again, the golden is in you being able to decide then that, oh, I see. Okay. And let it go. Because the last thing we want to do is get pulled into trying to convince. Convincing energy is really weird and ugly, and we get angsty about it. So the last thing we want to do is get into convincing energy. So I always recommend listen Listen for what there is to get. I also recommend that we listen almost as though we're listening to somebody read off a shopping list. I know that sounds really strange and you just kind of have to have your poker face on, but almost just listen and stay neutral and almost curious, like, I wonder what's getting them to want to say this, not from a place of judgment, but literally from a place of curiosity, right? Because you can also tell when somebody's shifted to that place of, oh, I'm just, crossing arms and I can't hear anything you say, right? So we can tell when somebody's done that.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And I love that advice of listening like it's a shopping list, like it's neutral. And because the opposite would be if I'm defensive, then I'm not listening. I'm thinking of the next thing I'm going to say to rebut whatever you say. Right.
Right.
So I'm not active listening at all. So getting to neutrality, I love that advice.
And again, sometimes you're not getting to neutrality. Sometimes you just got that poker face on.
Yeah, that's right. It looks like it's very neutral.
Neutrality. Your brain may be freaking out, so again, we're humans and that happens and that's okay. But even just trying to keep yourself looking neutral can add that little bit of buffer that you need. I also recommend, if you don't think you can stay neutral at the time, just excuse yourself. So, you know what? I really want to be able to give you the attention you need to have this conversation, but I actually have a call I need to get on, or I was about to run to the ladies' room, or whatever the case is. Literally have an escape plan. Just say, oh, I was about to pick up the phone because I owe somebody a call back, and excuse yourself and remove yourself from the situation, because then that gives you an opportunity to just regroup and be able to hear it or receive it and do with it what you actually need to do, on purpose, from a kind of a more, settled place, right? As opposed to feeling like you were
just escaping or running away from a problem or something like that. And how do you suggest, like, if you don't feel like it's a time to have, like, you're not, emotionally not in the place to have that conversation, or actually do have a call or whatever it is, like, how do you enter back into that conversation in a way that makes it not seamless, but like, I want to hear from you. This is important. Is it picking up right where you left off? Or, oh, hey, I have a minute now. Or how do you enter back into that conversation?
I think all those things you just said were perfect, just like you would with any other conversation, right? I think the reason that we might be questioning ourselves about how to do it is because we've already got a lot of angst kind of rolled up into what's going to happen. So if, just approaching it like any other conversation, hey, I have a minute now, or, hey, did you want to pick up? I really wanted to get your feedback, and sorry, I had to run off, so something like that. Yeah. I also recommend, when you're ready and you're in that space, actually, grab a notebook and your pen and actually start taking notes. Say, hold on a second. I want to make sure that I get all of this down. Because again, that does something else to the other person's mind. It also makes them conscious about what's coming out of their mouth, whether it makes any sense or whether it's just a rant. I mean, it won't always work, but it provides that opening. And I also think it keeps you, like us, the individual receiving the criticism, in kind of some level of control, even though it feels like we have no control over the situation. Right? Because we're saying, hold on, I want to make sure that I get this down. And you actually take it down as you would if you're an analyst, if you're taking down requirements or needs or whatever the case is, and just get it down and then read it back to them afterwards. Say, did I get all that? Is there anything missing? Because again, it's just a shopping list. It's just a preference list they're giving you. These are my top 10 radio stations I prefer. Okay, did I get all of those? It has nothing to do with you necessarily.
Well, and it shows that you have care and concern for their feedback or criticism, whatever it is too. You were listening if you took down all of the notes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's obviously particularly important because oftentimes, even if the feedback is coming from, our boss or our main client or our executive stakeholder or sponsor, we don't necessarily want to hear it and it doesn't feel good. So to the extent that we can approach it as, from that solution-oriented view or perspective, it also just, again, it keeps us in control, but I think it just also probably makes us even look good in the other person's eyes and might even make them question their critique, right? Or make sure their critique is not about us, but rather about the task at hand.
The task, the situation, and moving to an intended outcome. Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah, precisely.
I love all of your advice. It's so good. And I think I feel like I could talk to you, Asia, for forever on these things. It's so good.
We could. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to make sure that we know that we tell the listeners how to connect with you. So I love leaving a call to action. So what do you think our call to action is, and how can we connect with you?
Absolutely. So the first, I actually have some tools, and I have a summary of some of the tools that I shared here regarding responding to criticism for anyone who's interested. So you guys can find that and watch a little 30-minute video. I think you can even put it on double speed if you want to hear me talk really fast. And that is at bridgewellpro.com. That's my website, and I have free resources there. But that is one that I would recommend. And when you go to that resources page, though, I think a good follow-on to this conversation, just because it keeps might keep your brain primed to what's important in the moment or in the situation, is I just put a resource up there recently, 3 leadership conversations you should be having at work. So I recommend downloading that one, and seeing if you're having those conversations at work. They're different. They're very unique, 3 unique conversations, but that I think probably apply no matter your industry or your role.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for making those available to our audience. And we'll put the links to those in the show notes as well.
Okay, excellent. And then one other, you will see when you go to the site, depending on when you're listening to this, I'll have a leadership confidence intensive weekend coming up. That is my absolute, my lowest priced offering and just the most beloved now. It's something that I've just started doing this year. And we already had one, and it was fantastic. So you can read about that leadership confidence intensive weekend, and we just go to the next level with a lot of what we touched on, in this short conversation, and walk away with exercises and kind of group masterminding over the weekend. And again, participants love it. So take a look and see what the next date is available, or add yourself to the wait list, because I would love to see everyone there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this conversation and connection. I really appreciate you, and I hope that we stay connected.
Thank you. Likewise. Bye.
I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content. We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.